Joining us now from The Hague is NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte. Mr. Secretary General, thank you for joining us. Let me just ask you the big question. What do you expect to come out of this Trump-Putin summit?
Well, first, John, thank you for having me on the program. And I think it is important that the meeting takes place next Friday. President Trump broke the deadlock with Putin in February. That was very important. He was the one delivering the big success at the NATO summit, the 5% spending commitment in June, one of the biggest foreign policy successes of the US in the last couple of years. And of course, only a couple of weeks ago, he decided to, again, open the floodgates of lethal support into Ukraine and to put secondary sanctions on countries like India. So he clearly is putting pressure on Putin. Next Friday will be important because it will be about testing Putin, how serious he is on bringing this terrible war to an end.
As I understand it, the European leaders are in agreement that there needs to be a ceasefire first before anything else, that if Ukraine pulls out of any territory, Russia needs to pull out of territory as well, and that if there is an agreement here, Ukraine must have security guarantees, including the possibility of sometime acceding to NATO membership. Do you believe that Donald Trump is on board with all of that?
Well, I believe the European leaders and Ukraine brought out a good statement last night after successful talks with Vice President Vance in London. It's important that the US is engaging with European allies and with Ukraine to prepare for the meeting on Friday. And of course, when it comes to full-scale negotiations, and let's hope that Friday will be an important step in that process. We need Ukraine at the table. It will be about territory. It will be, of course, about security guarantees, but also about the absolute need to acknowledge that Ukraine decides on its own future, that Ukraine has to be a sovereign nation, deciding on its own geopolitical future, of course, having no limitations to its own military troop levels, and for NATO to have no limitations on our presence on the eastern flank in countries like Latvia, Estonia, and Finland.
So you've been clear about that just now. The European leaders have been clear about that. But do you believe that Donald Trump supports all of what you just said?
I do believe that. Donald Trump, the president, wants to end this. He wants to end the terrible loss of life. He wants to end the terrible damage being done to the infrastructure in Ukraine. So many people losing their lives, so much damage being done. And clearly, these two big issues have to be on the table. One is territory. And we have to acknowledge at this moment that Russia is controlling some of Ukrainian territory. And the question will be how to go forward past a ceasefire, including what it means in terms of security guarantees for Ukraine. And let me add one important aspect here. When it comes to this whole issue of territory, when it comes to acknowledging, for example, maybe in a future deal that Russia is controlling de facto, factually, some of the territory of Ukraine, it has to be a factual recognition and not a political de jure recognition. And we all remember that Lithuania, Estonia and Latvia had embassies in Washington between 1940 and 1991. Acknowledging the Soviet Union, yes, controlling that territory, but never in terms of legally accepting that fact.
And very quickly, my next guest, Trump's former national security advisor, John Bolton, says that this meeting comes at a very dangerous point for Ukraine, and he fears that negotiations are sliding in Russia's direction. Is there a risk that something is agreed to here that rewards Russia for its invasion of Ukraine?
No, I don't think that risk is there. And all my respect for John, and please send him my best regards. But I would not agree on this point with him. We have seen President Trump putting incredible pressure on Russia. What happened last week, the extra 25% tariffs on India, because we know that India is one of the biggest buyers of oil from and other material from Russia. And this has a huge impact potentially on the Indian economy. And this is forcing them to be much more clear with Moscow on what they expect Putin to do when it comes to this war in Ukraine. But also the fact that he opened the floodgates again when it comes to lethal weapons being delivered into Ukraine, paid by the Europeans, but delivered by the Americans. So this is all clear evidence that President Trump is absolutely adamant to bring this war to an end, but also to keep maximum pressure on Putin. And next Friday will be important because it is testing Putin, how serious he is in this whole process, which will then have to continue after Friday with Ukraine involved, with others involved, to bring this war to an end.
All right, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much.